Good morning all. Just before we start, just a reminder about your mobiles if you haven't done that. Thanks.
The summer days are ending in the valley, and soon the time will come when we must be apart. But like the rose that comes back with the springtime, you will return to me when springtime comes around. Till the white rose blooms again, you must leave me lonely. So goodbye, my love, till then, till the white rose blooms again, till the white rose blooms again. You must leave me lonely. So goodbye, my love, till then, till the white rose blooms again. Goodbye till then. Goodbye till then. Goodbye till then.
You're the family and the friends of Helen Mary Cassidy. I think with Helen's death, we see some of the different aspects that death can have. In Helen's case, it's a certain sense of completion. She's lived a long life, a very long life. And of course, there's been that wearing out over the last little while. So with the death, we see that natural cycle of life and death happening. We can make sense of her death. But having said that, we're also aware that it's not as simple as that. I think death, like life itself, is never quite as simple as what we work out in our heads. And mainly because this morning we're not simply talking about the death of an elderly woman. We're talking about Helen who's died. Helen who's been your mother, grandmother, has been part of your family, has been part of your life. And of course, that makes all the difference. In our families, we're part of that whole process of the giving and the receiving of life. The receiving of love and care and learning how to return that. That sense of belonging that comes from being family. As well as family, though, people can come into our lives in a variety of ways, and with certain people we make a connection and they make a difference to us. We become friends. And it's through those friendships, but especially in our families, that we're very much aware of being in life together with each other. And when death comes, that acute awareness of an ending. And there's that sense of loss and perhaps what we could describe as sort of a gentle sadness that will just come and go. Gentle, but still very real. And it says to us something about how much a part of each other's life we have been. In our families, of course, that happens to us in a particular way when it is our second parent who dies. There's that end of a generation in our own immediate family. Again, in our heads, we tell ourselves, well, that's normally the way that things go. But when it happens to us, when we experience it ourselves, it can have at times its own quite profound effect on us. So we reflect on that today, we're aware of that. But more particularly now, we'd like to look back over those times of Helen's life as a way of recognising the place that she's had in the world, and especially, of course, the place that she's had in your world. And we're doing that now through words and images and music. And as you can see from the order of service, the words are coming from those who have been very much a part of Helen's life. And Tom's going first.
We're all here today to remember Helen. She was born on the 4th of December 1923. Helen's parents, Hugh Main and Joan Tregarthen, had met in Sydney and married at St Mark's, Darling Point. Helen was the oldest of two siblings. Peter Main is her youngest brother, loved Helen very much. He lives in Yankalilla, South Australia, and unfortunately is unable to attend today. She also had a sister, Alison, or Ali, as she was commonly known to all her friends and family. Ali is no longer with us, and all three siblings are very, very close. Helen grew up in the country. She spent her early days in Cootamundra in southwest New South Wales on a property called Retreat. Retreat was home for Mum. Retreat was a substantial property with lots of things happening. And Mum just loved the country. The farm bred sheep, raced horses and grew wheat. Next door was Retreat East, the farm of her uncle. Both brothers also bred race horses. Retreat had a tennis court. It was here the seed was sown for one of Mum's great loves and hobbies and interests, tennis. She was infatuated by tennis. If the tennis was on TV, you just couldn't drag her away. It was 24/7. On the tennis court there, Helen found a passion. She played tennis for her whole life with friends at the property. They used to have tennis days. People used to come from miles around to play at school and when she lived in Sydney. She used to take us, Pamela and I, to the tennis club every week where she used to socialise with friends who all became very, very close. And it was a very hard task to beat Mum at a game of tennis, even until later in life when she couldn't even really stand up for very long. She used to sit down in a chair and could still beat us. Unbelievable. Mum's school days started at the local school at Illabo, to be followed by Askham at Edgecliff and then Frensham at Mittagong, where she was a boarder. She had many, many tales to tell about her school days. During the war, Helen was a helper with the Red Cross. She taught arts and crafts to the wounded servicemen at Concord Hospital. In 1960, Helen married Cecil John Cassidy at St Candace at Elizabeth Bay and gained a son, John Cassidy, to his first partner. Helen had 2 children, myself, Thomas, and Pamela. She had 9 grandchildren, Stephen, Andrew, Emily, Vanessa, Singrid, Maximilian, Belinda, Daniel, and Benny. And she also had 6 great-grandchildren, Lexi, Claudia, Maddie, Lockie, Mason, and Freddie. Helen loved taking her children and grandchildren to plays and pantomimes. They were very fond days I have with Mum and Dad going to the music hall at Neutral Bay, where we would enjoy a dinner and a live show, which is now gone. It's units or something now. The days of music halls and things are over. Helen loved her garden. She had her country-style veggie patch in the city, and I've got to say it was the only veggie patch that had barbed wire around it in the city that I know of. Not quite sure why it had barbed wire around it. People say it was to keep us kids in, but might have been to keep other people out. It was a pretty elaborate veggie garden. She had rhubarb, beans, beetroot, carrots, asparagus, and her favourite, broad beans. Never liked the broad beans, but anyhow, we were forced to eat them. She also had fruit trees, pawpaws, peaches, grapefruit, and lemons. And Mr. Kilby next door had bananas and the largest mulberry tree that the kids could climb. Always to help her, Helen took the kids to school. Most days she would have a full car, collecting other kids from the street, filling the car. There were no seatbelts in those days, so they used to just jump in. She loved to babysit all children, not just in the street, but ours and the grandkids and great-grandkids as well. Wherever she could help, she did, wherever it was possible. She just loved helping out where it was possible with organisations like Meals on Wheels. In the community, she did that for over 20 years. She was a devout supporter of community aid. She was there to help older people get out and about. She helped them go out shopping, to the doctors, and just to be with and have a cup of tea sometimes. Mum, you'll be sadly missed.
Thanks, Tom. The 16th of June, 1956. Was the saddest day of my life. My mum died. She was 37 and I was 3 weeks short of being 12. I was absolutely shattered. I was inconsolable. I felt so alone. I felt it was only me. But 4 years later, all this changed. My dad married a lovely lady, Helen Mary Main. She became Helen Mary Cassidy, obviously. She was then Mum, and when the grandkids came along, she was Granny. And she was Granny for more than 50 years, so today I'll just call her Granny, because that's what we as the family know her as. Granny was a country girl, as Tom said. She came from Cootamundra, well, a bit out of Coota, in between Coota and Temora, down near Illabo on the way to Bathungra on the Dernasia Road. She lived there with her mum and dad and a younger sister, Alison, and a younger brother, Peter, Peter's wife, Rita, and their 4 boys, David, Graham, Ian and Scott. Dad had met the main family on a ship. Our dad was a marine engineer and went to sea most of his life. He sailed for over 50 years. And he met the main family on a ship. In those days, there used to be lots of Australian ships on the Aussie coast, crewed by Australian crews. Now there's virtually none. A lot of these ships were cargo ships or passenger cargo ships, and the Department of Shipping and Navigation in those days would allow up to 12 passengers on a ship. Over 12, you had to carry a doctor, so the shipping companies would have cabins for 8, 9, 10 or 12 people. Dad met the main family and obviously made an impression with them, and especially Peter, who was very mechanically minded for a farmer, and Dad and Peter hit it off together. Anyway, Dad's next shore leave, he came to me. I was living with my cousins at Clovelly. I was 14 or 15 at the time, and he said, I think when I go on leave, we'll go up to, I met some friends at Cootamundra and we'll go and stay on their property. I said, what's up there? He said, no, you'll like it, it'll be fine. So Michael Meadows and myself and Grandad went up to Retreat East, and met the Main family. The Mains, their hospitality was superb, country style. Nothing was any trouble to them. They could do anything. Peter had workshops. They had thousands of acres. They grew wheat and sheep. And Michael and I had a great time up there. Peter taught us to hunt foxes and to hunt rabbits and to skin rabbits. And he taught us to ride horses. They had race horses, as Tom mentioned. But after falling off a racehorse a couple of times, I went off racehorses because they had motorbikes. Peter had these bikes that he had in the shed there for whipping around the paddocks, chasing sheep and things, and Michael and I had a bike each. They were only 120 cc's, but they could go pretty fast. Chris, especially bush bashing over the paddocks. Peter also up there, he taught us to conserve water, to be a lateral thinker, and we really enjoyed our time with the Main family up at Cooter. Granny's dad, who had one farm on one side called Retreat and Retreat East, and his brother had the other big property. They were both the same size, and they had inherited these from their dad, who'd cleared the land to make these properties. Granny's dad was humane, and besides being a pastoralist, he was also a member of the New South Wales government for 18 continual years. And in 1920, when he first stood for Parliament with the Progressive Party, which later became the Country Party, so I guess you can't win them all, but and it was one of the biggest boilovers in New South Wales political history when Hugh Mayne was elected to Parliament, because not only did he beat the incumbent person who held the seat, he also beat the Premier of New South Wales, who was that particular incumbent in the seat of Cootamundra. So he ousted the Premier and became, as I said, the member for Cooter, and later when they changed the boundaries, he became the member for Temora. In his 18 years in Parliament, He was a minister twice, once the Minister for Forestry, but the one that he cherished the most and was the member for, or held the position for longest, over 6 years, was the Minister for Agriculture, which I guess that made him the #1 farmer in New South Wales. And not only as part of his duties as being the Minister for Agriculture, he also had the honour of opening the Royal Easter Show each year. His brother on the other property was George Mayne. George Mayne, where Hugh had gone into politics, George had gone into racehorses. And both the brothers used to breed racehorses to see who could get the fastest one. George Mayne became the chairman of the AJC and held that title for many years. And to this day, at Royal Randwick, in the Spring Carnival, they have a Group 1 race, which is the highest race, highest prize money, most prestigious race that we have in this state, and it is called the George Mayne Stakes, and they run it each September at Randwick. Okay. Dad and Granny got married, as Tom said, in 1960. They bought a block of ground at DY, 20 Tango Avenue, where we hope you'll come back and have a cup of tea or something with us after this today. But 20 Tango Avenue, they called it a block of ground. I called it a bloody rock farm. It had boulders in it as big as lounge rooms, rocks, enormous rocks. It's up behind the Bonds factory. It's on top of Stony Range, that word, Stony Range, Flora Reserve down on Pittwater Road. And these rocks, for the next 6 months, Dad and I, every weekend on jackhammers, making little rocks out of big ones. Eventually the house was built and we moved in, the three of us, Dad and Granny and myself. Dad, back at work, going to sea, he'd be away for 2 or 3 weeks or sometimes months. So it was just Granny and I in the house, and what a wonderful, wonderful person she was. I was a little apprentice at Cockatoo Island in those days, out in the dockyards. And to get from DY to Cockatoo Island to start work each morning took 2 hours and 10 minutes by public transport. I had to catch the 20 past 5 bus at DY to get to Manly Wharf, to catch the Manly Ferry, to get to Circular Quay, to catch the Cockatoo Island Ferry, to get up to the island so we could start work at 7:30. But every day that I went to work, caught public transport for my 5-year apprenticeship, Granny would come in and wake me up at 10 to 5 each morning. She'd give me a shake. Johnny, Johnny, it's time to get up. Wake me up. I'd go in the bathroom, have a quick shower, get dressed, come out. She'd have a cooked breakfast for me and my lunch. She was just a lovely, lovely person. At night, Granny and I'd be there, the two of us. Had a black and white telly as people had in those days, the early 60s. And we only had channels 2, 7 and 9, and a bit of a difference in our ages, so we liked different programs. So we worked out that I'd choose one night, Granny would choose the programs the next night, which was fine because I always picked the programs I liked when it was my turn, and I'm pretty sure that when Granny had her turn, the next night she picked the programs I liked as well. She certainly knew I liked Peyton Place, and nothing's changed, I liked Abigail. And for those people, it's gone over all these young people's heads, but Granny and I, for 59 years she was my mum, we never had an argument. We never had a crossword. Granny loved the kids. She loved gardening. She loved the colour green. She loved tennis, as Tom said. She loved playing tennis and she loved watching tennis. She especially loved her grandkids. She minded grandkids for 40 years. I can remember when our first ones came along, Stephen and Andrew, and we'd ring Granny up because we lived up at Warriewood. She lived at DY in the surf club that I went to, was down at South Curly. So we'd ring Granny up and say, Granny, there'd be something on the surf club. Would you be able to mind the kids on Saturday night? Oh, yes, of course. What time are you going to bring them? And we had bassinets and folding cots and things. We said, we'll bring them at 7 o'clock. Oh, no, bring them before that. I could give them something to eat. I say, okay then, Granny, we'll bring them at 5 o'clock. Oh, no, bring them at 4 and they could have a play first. And that's the sort of woman she was, just wonderful, wonderful woman. She was so community-minded, she would do anything for anybody. She did Meals on Wheels for decades. She had some funny stories about Meals on Wheels. There was the man that wouldn't eat the Brussels sprouts. And as soon as she'd come in each day, he'd say, there's no Brussels sprouts, are there? And she'd have to check beforehand if there was any Brussels sprouts, which apparently there often was, and she'd have to take them off and put them in a plastic bag so he didn't see them. There was another guy that used to wait at the door for her and tell her, Helen, you're 2 minutes late or you're 10 minutes early. There's another man, I think his name was Mr. Williams. She used to go to him for years and years and years, and he'd say to her every day that she went there, is there any ice cream today? And she'd say, no, there's no ice cream today, Mr. Williams, because they had normally cake, but they'd have a custard or a sauce with it or something. But she thought, one day I'll stop at the corner shop and I'll buy Mr. Williams an ice cream. And when he comes and says, Helen, is there any ice cream? She said, yes, there is. I've got one for you, but you've got to have your hot lunch first. I'll put it in the freezer. So she did that. And then the next week when she came, she thought, strike, I better buy him another ice cream. So she bought him another ice cream. And he'd come, any ice cream today? Yes, there's ice cream. I'll put it in the freezer. So she goes to the freezer. Here's the one from last week, still in the freezer. So she never worked out whether he didn't like ice cream or couldn't remember. She did community transport for years and years, taking people, as Tom said, to their doctor's appointments. Often when it was a longer appointment from DY to Royal North Shore Hospital, they'd tell you beforehand, when they'd ring up the volunteer and say, look, it's going to be a long one or it's a long way away or whatever, and they'd say to Granny, it might be 3 hours, this guy's got to have tests done and that. And she'd say, that's all right, I'll wait for him. She said, I'll take a book. That was just the sort of person she was. I had the chance once to pay her back a little bit for all the time she woke me up and got me off to work. She came in one morning and it was the day Tom was born. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of you have heard this story. And she said, wake me up, Johnny, I've got to go to the hospital. And I said, okay, I'm awake. And we had a bag already packed at the front door because we knew this might happen. Dad was away at sea, he was always away at sea. And we jumped in the Vauxhall Velox, and she didn't have to go to Manly Hospital, which was close. She had to go to the Women's Hospital in Crown Street. And Crown Street was a long way away. So I'm driving the Vauxhall Velox down the Spit Hill. Granny's in the back seat. I'm doing 80 mile an hour. And she said, Johnny, I'm not in that much of a hurry. I said, you mightn't be, but I am. But I'm happy to say that I got to the hospital with more than half a day to spare. And this big brute over here was the result of what happened. Granny was such a wonderful, wonderful woman who cared about others all her life. She was generous with her time and with her love. And I thank you, Helen Mary Cassidy, for being our mum and our granny. I know you now are in a better place, and you will be reaping all those rewards that are due to you in heaven. Your family will miss you. We won't forget you. And until we meet again, we say goodbye, Granny. May you rest in peace. Thank you.
In our rose garden of memories, we see you standing there. An angel in disguise who taught us how to care.
We long to hear your voice for real, not in our dreams. We miss you so much, how empty our world seems.
People say that time heals all wounds, that someday the pain will subside. But Granny, we can tell you, we think they must abide.
The emptiness we are feeling now is strong and we are weak. The days that go by without you are so dreary and so bleak.
In our rose garden of memories, we know you'll always be. Even though you're gone, in our hearts you'll always be.
And a time now to look back on some of those times of Helen's life through some of the images of her life.
Tell me if heaven has a garden, could you take my mama there? Walk her slowly to your flower bed, pick her roses for all the words unsaid. Kiss her gently on her soft cheek, carry her if her legs are weak. Please tell her I'm okay down here. Does she see me? Can she hear? I've heard heaven has a garden with angels singing on a cloudy bandstand. Up in heaven in that garden, won't you take my mama there by the hand? She left me with memories of gold. Her gentle love was a wonder to behold. Ask her to sing her favorite song. From way down here, I'll sing along. I've heard heaven has a garden with angels singing on a cloudy bandstand. Up in heaven in the garden, won't you take my mama there by the hand? Won't you take my mama there by the hand?
I guess the most obvious thing about Helen's life, of course, was how long she lived and just all the things that she saw happen in her lifetime. I can only try to imagine that world in which you grew up down there in the country and how different it was to the world that she left a few days ago. But more important than the length of her life was the way in which she's lived her life. And that's part of the legacy that she leaves. Firstly, she's left yourselves, the family that's stretched out over the generations to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But also another kind of legacy, a legacy of her way of life. And we keep that legacy with us through the memories that we have. And we remember all sorts of things as we've been talking about this morning. And sometimes they're the things that we see as the important things of life. What Helen was like as a wife, as a mother, a granny, those qualities that she had as a woman, the values that she lived. Most importantly, on that personal level, the difference that she's made to your lives. Big realities that we find impossible to adequately express because no matter what we say, we think, yes, that's right, but there was more to it than that. There was more to us, to our relationship than what words can encompass. And one of the ways in which we deal with that, I think, is to do what we do almost automatically. That is, we remember and we talk about the things that we did together with one another. Sometimes, of course, it will be those big moments of life. But more often than not, our memories go to much more mundane things, simply to things that we did together with one another. In our families, we do all sorts of things. We pass on life, of course. Sometimes we pass on possessions. But also in our families, we have these family stories. And there's something about them because when we remember them, we notice something happening, and that is that we not only remember what we did, but much more importantly, we recall something of what it was like when we were doing it, what life felt like when we were together. And it is that takes these seemingly mundane memories and makes them precious for us. I could listen to some of the stories that Tom and John told, and I could relate to them in a certain way, remembered, taken place. But to me, they were just stories. To you, they were more than that. They were your life together. And that ability that we have to look back and to remember, it's not simply an exercise in nostalgia. It's a way in which we take something with that past and we keep it with us. We keep with us something of that very spirit of life that we've shared with each other. And it's with these memories that you have of Helen that we now can enter into God's care. So let us pray. We pray today in memory of Helen Mary Cassidy. We pray with a sense of loss that flows from being family, having been a friend, from having loved her. We pray with gratitude for the gift of life that Helen has had, and with appreciation for the way in which she shared her gift of life with us and with so many people, for the way in which she's done that with dedication and devotion, first of all in the family, but then spreading out from the family to so many others, for the way in which she's done that with dedication and devotion, with such a generosity of spirit. And so we pray with hope and confidence now that God will give to her a fullness of life. And we pray as we continue with our lives, we'll do so with her memory as a part of our lives, and we'll do it more easily because of the family life that we continue together and the support that we bring to one another with our compassion. We pray together now the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I'd like to stand now for our farewell ceremony. Thanks. And as we take our partings from Helen today, we do so with many different thoughts and feelings. Those that range from sadness and loss, but those also, and especially of gratitude and appreciation for Helen's life. Or those things that come from being family with her, or having been part of something of the goodness and the richness of life with her. And again, just another reminder of the family's invitation to gather there in Tango Avenue to share the memories and tell some of the stories of your lives together.
far behind. Be where trouble melts like lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, and the dream that you dare to, oh why can't I? Oh, someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like a lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where